If you woke up tomorrow and realized your entire future had already been priced, your last name as the receipt, your marriage as the transaction, would you step into the life they picked for you? Or would you gamble everything on the life you want? Before we begin, if you're into forbidden romance, high-stakes rebellion, and the kind of choices that can ruin a dynasty or ignite a revolution, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Evelyn chose her heart, because what happens next only gets more dangerous, and you will want to be here when the first betrayal lands. They called it a celebration. The chandeliers in Evelyn's father's estate spilled warm light over marble floors and silk gowns over crystal glasses and polished smiles. Roses perfumed the air so heavily it felt like the scent itself was trying to drown the truth. Music drifted through the hall, soft, elegant, obedient, like everything else in Evelyn's world. She sat at the center of it all, dressed in a gown that caught the candlelight and scattered it across the room like starlight. Anyone watching would have said she looked like destiny, like privilege, like a girl who had never known hunger, never known fear, never known a locked door. But inside, Evelyn felt like a jewel sitting in a velvet box, admired for its shine, valued for its rarity, and owned so completely that no one thought to ask if it wanted to be free. Suitors circled her like planets around a sun they believed belonged to them. A young nobleman leaned in with a grin practiced in mirrors. "Your father and mine could do great things together," he said, as if his family's power were a love letter. A wealthy merchant promised exotic fabrics and a carriage lined with gold. Another man spoke of titles of land, of what Evelyn would become once she belonged to him. Their compliments were expensive. Their intentions were not. Evelyn smiled because she had been taught to smile. She laughed softly because a lady did. She nodded because to refuse would be impolite, and in this house impolite was just another word for disobedient. Inside her chest, something heavy settled, as if each proposal placed another stone on her ribs. Why must I marry for status? Why can't love be my choice? The questions echoed in her mind, but no one in this hall was interested in what Evelyn thought. They were interested in what Evelyn represented: a bridge between families, a seal on a deal, a prize at the end of a long negotiation. Across the room, her father watched. Lord Harrington sat in the high-backed chair at the head of the hall, smiling like a generous king. His gaze was calm, even affectionate, and anyone who didn't know him might have mistaken it for pride. Evelyn knew better. Her father's smile was a mask. Beneath it lived control, quiet, absolute, and patient. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The entire estate moved according to his will, as if the stone itself had learned to obey. Evelyn felt his expectations tighten around her throat like invisible hands. Later, when the last toast was made and the last flattering lie was whispered into her ear, Evelyn returned to her chamber. The room was vast and luxurious, designed to make any girl feel safe if she didn't understand that comfort can be a cage. Moonlight spilled through the curtains in pale ribbons, painting silver lines across the floor. Evelyn lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the estate's silence. It wasn't peace. It was pressure. She tried to imagine the life her father was offering her. A husband selected for wealth and lineage, children raised like assets, dinners filled with politics disguised as conversation. A life where every choice was already chosen. Something inside her flinched. I refuse to live a life that isn't mine. The thought arrived quietly, but it didn't leave. It grew. It warmed. It burned. And for the first time, Evelyn didn't try to smother it. The next morning, she woke with restlessness clawing at her skin. The estate's corridors felt narrower than usual. The servants' bowed heads felt heavier. The routines, the same tea, the same lessons, the same polite conversations felt like chains disguised as tradition. Evelyn stood by the window and watched sunlight brighten the world beyond the gates. Somewhere out there, people laughed loudly without permission. Somewhere out there, life was not a performance. She made a decision that would have horrified her father. She would leave the estate just for a few hours, just long enough to taste something real. Evelyn dressed in a plain cloak, the kind worn by women who carried their own baskets and made their own choices. She tucked her hair beneath the hood and removed every piece of jewelry that marked her status. She looked at her reflection and barely recognized herself. Good. She slipped through side corridors, past sleepy guards, past servants too busy to question a girl who moved like she belonged. The gates loomed ahead, huge iron, unquestioned. When she passed through them, her heart jumped. It wasn't only fear, it was freedom. Outside, the town hit her like a living wave. The market was loud and colorful and unruly. Vendors shouted prices. Children darted between stalls. Coins clinked. Wheels creaked. The air was thick with the smell of spices, fresh bread, citrus smoke, and sweat. Life wasn't polished here. It was honest. Evelyn breathed in, and it felt like the first full breath she'd taken in years. She wandered slowly, letting the crowd swallow her, letting anonymity wrap around her like armor. No one bowed. No one called her my lady. No one watched her like she was an investment. For a moment, she was just a girl. Then she saw him. He stood near a wooden cart, tall and broad-shouldered, his posture relaxed but alert, like a man used to watching for danger. His features were sharp in a way that suggested hardship had carved him into something unbreakable. Dark hair, dark eyes, the kind of eyes that didn't look away first. He should have blended into the crowd. He didn't. There was a quiet strength in him, a calm defiance that didn't need volume. He moved with an ease that made Evelyn think of a wolf walking through a field of sheep, not because he was dangerous, but because he was free in a way the sheep couldn't imagine. And then his gaze met hers. The market's noise blurred, the world narrowed. Something sparked quick electric, impossible to explain. Evelyn's pulse stumbled. Who is he? She turned away quickly, annoyed at herself, at her own reaction. He was a stranger, a man from a world she'd never touched. Nothing about him should matter, but the memory of his eyes clung to her like a song she couldn't stop hearing. She tried to distract herself with stalls and colors and conversation, but her mind kept slipping back, replaying that moment, the sunlight catching the angles of his face, the steady confidence in his expression, the way he looked at her as if she were not a prize, but a person. As the day stretched toward evening, Evelyn found herself circling back without admitting she was doing it. And there he was again, still near the same place now, laughing with a group of vendors. He handed a child a piece of bread and ruffled the kid's hair like it was the most natural thing in the world. People around him smiled, relaxed. He had that kind of presence, magnetic grounding, quietly bright. Evelyn stopped at a distance watching. She didn't plan to speak. Her mouth betrayed her. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked. Her voice was barely above the market's hum, but he heard it anyway. He turned surprised for a heartbeat, then intrigued. His eyes flicked over her cloak, her hood, the careful way she tried to hide the parts of herself that didn't belong here. Instead of calling her out, his lips curved like he'd just found something interesting in a book he wasn't supposed to be reading. "Fate has a strange way of weaving paths together," he said. His voice was low, warm, and steady, like it had carried him through storms. Evelyn swallowed. "What do you think it wants?" He stepped a little closer, not enough to trap her, just enough to make her feel the heat of his presence. "Maybe it wants to see who dares to cross the line," he murmured. "Cross the line." The words hit Evelyn harder than they should have. He tilted his head. "And what brings a lady in a cloak to the market hiding like a secret?" Evelyn's instincts screamed to lie, to say she was shopping, to say she was lost, to say nothing at all and run back to her safe cage. But something about his gaze made lying feel pointless. "I needed to escape." She admitted the truth, slipping out before she could choke it back. To feel something real, something beyond expectations. He studied her as if he could see the invisible chains on her wrists. Then his expression softened. "Then you understand longing," he said quietly. "We're all bound by something duty, fear the rules of people who benefit from our obedience. But sometimes it takes one moment of courage to loosen the knots." "You speak like you know," Evelyn said, her voice trembling with curiosity. A shadow flickered across his face, something old and sharp. "I know what it means to be trapped," he replied. "But I also know what hope is worth. It keeps a person alive when the world tries to make them smaller." The sun dipped lower, turning the market gold. Evelyn felt a strange ache, a pull toward him, toward the honesty in his words, toward the freedom he carried like it was sewn into his skin. And then reality crashed back in cold and brutal: her father's estate, her status, the suitors, the rules. She was a lord's daughter. He was not. In her world, their conversation alone could be dangerous. Evelyn took a step back. "I should go." He didn't grab her. He didn't plead. He only held her gaze and said almost gently, "If you come back because you choose it, not because you're afraid." Evelyn turned away, her heart pounding with a new kind of fear, the fear of wanting something she wasn't allowed to want. That night in her chamber, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the market, hearing his voice, feeling that moment when her lungs filled with air that wasn't filtered through her father's power. The next days blurred into a pattern she didn't recognize as her own. Evelyn began inventing excuses to leave the estate: a need for flowers, a desire for fabric, a charitable errand. Each time she wrapped herself in that plain cloak, slipped past the guards, and let the market's chaos erase her title. It became a ritual, a sanctuary. And always threaded through it all was the hope of seeing him again. When she finally did, it was on a bright afternoon when the market's energy felt almost reckless. He was leaning against a cart surrounded by children who laughed at his playful teasing. He looked up when Evelyn approached, and his grin widened like he'd been expecting her even when he had no reason to. "Back for another taste of freedom?" he asked. Evelyn's cheeks warmed. "I suppose I am." He bowed, slightly more playful than submissive, like a man who refused to bend his spine for anyone. "Alden," he said. "And you, mysterious lady." Evelyn hesitated. Names could be weapons. Names could be cages. But names could also be a bridge. "Evelyn," she said finally. Only her first name, like a tiny rebellion all by itself. Alden didn't press. He just nodded, and in that small act of respect, Evelyn felt something inside her unclench. "What brings Evelyn to this place?" he asked, quieter now. Evelyn glanced around to make sure no one was watching too closely. "I'm tired," she confessed, "of being a pawn, of being traded like a piece on a board. I want a life that feels like it belongs to me." Alden's expression shifted, no longer teasing now, careful, almost protective. "Most people don't dare to say that out loud," he murmured. "You're braver than you think." "And you?" Evelyn asked. "What is your life like?" Alden's jaw tightened. "My life is service," he said plainly. "Chains that don't sparkle. Orders that don't pretend to be love. A world that decided my worth before I ever had a chance to speak." The words landed between them like iron. Evelyn felt anger flare in her stomach. Not the polite anger of ballroom gossip, but the raw kind, the kind that demanded change. "Do you accept it?" she asked. Alden's eyes sharpened. "I endure it," he corrected. "But I don't accept it. There's a fire in me they haven't managed to put out." Evelyn's breath caught. What if she said daring herself as much as him? We could change our fates. Alden studied her skepticism, fighting with curiosity. "Rebellion is dangerous," he warned. "It can cost you everything." Evelyn's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Maybe that's the price of living as yourself." Alden was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. "If we do anything," he said, "we do it with purpose. with strategy, not just anger. And just like that, their meetings changed shape. They still talked about the market, about small joys. They still laughed sometimes, and in those laughs, Evelyn felt more alive than she ever had in a room full of nobles. But underneath it all, something heavier grew, shared. Truths, shared wounds, shared hunger for freedom. Evelyn told Alden about the suffocating halls of the estate, the suitors chosen like purchases, the way her father's expectations wrapped around her like a noose made of silk. Alden told Evelyn about early mornings and late nights, about hands blistered from work, about the constant vigilance of someone who could be punished for breathing wrong. He spoke of friends who had stopped dreaming because dreaming hurt too much. Their stories braided together until Evelyn couldn't separate her own longing from Alden's. The world wanted them to be strangers. Instead, they became allies. One night, they sat on a low stone wall beneath a sky scattered with stars. What if we created a network? Alden suggested, his voice low but urgent. A group of people who want change. Servants. Guards who are tired of enforcing cruelty. Merchants who've been squeezed by corruption. People who are ready to risk something. Evelyn's heart raced. A network? Where would we even meet? There's an abandoned warehouse near the river, Alden said. Secluded. Forgotten. We could gather there quietly and see who's willing. Evelyn imagined it, faces lit by candlelight, fear and hope sharing space in the same room. She imagined standing in front of them, speaking without her father's permission. Her hands trembled. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked. Alden's gaze held steady. "Fear is strong," he said, "but hope is stronger when it's shared. We just have to plant the first seed." The night of the first meeting arrived like a storm cloud. Evelyn spent hours preparing, rehearsing words in her mind, trying to shape her fear into something useful. She dressed in dark clothes and slipped out of the estate under the cover of night, moving with the careful speed of someone who knows one wrong step could end everything. When she reached the warehouse, Alden was waiting. His silhouette was framed by moonlight, and seeing him there, real steady, made Evelyn's panic loosen its grip. "Are you ready?" he asked. Evelyn exhaled. "No," she admitted. "But I'm here." Alden's mouth curved. "That's enough." Inside, candles flickered against rough wooden beams. A small group stood in the center, faces, tense eyes darting as if expecting guards to burst through the doors at any moment. Servants from the estate hands, calloused. Merchants tired of paying bribes disguised as fees. A few guards, their loyalty cracked by what they'd seen and done. A young woman with a basket of flowers, Clara, whose gaze was sharp, despite the tremble in her hands. A blacksmith's apprentice, Tomas, broad and quiet, watching everything like he was already planning. Evelyn stepped forward. Her voice shook at first, but once it began, it found strength it didn't know it had. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We are here because we share something, the desire to live with dignity. We are tired of being controlled by people who treat our lives like property. We are tired of being silent." A murmur rippled through the group. Evelyn continued, forcing herself to meet their eyes. "I know you're afraid. I am too. But fear has kept us trapped for too long. Alone, we are easy to break. Together, we have a chance." Alden stepped beside her, grounding her with his presence. "We've lived in silence long enough," he said. "We need organization. Smaller groups. Coded messages. Safe places. Trust but caution. If we're careless, we lose everything." A merchant spoke up, voice tight. "And if we're caught?" Evelyn's heart hammered. She thought of her father's power, the punishments he could unleash. She thought of Alden's chains. Then she said what she knew was true. "If we do nothing, we're already caught," Evelyn replied. "We're just pretending we aren't. This is the only path where change is possible." The room went still. Then Clara lifted her chin. Tomas nodded once. One of the guards swallowed hard and said, "Tell us what to do." That was the moment the rebellion stopped being a dream and became a plan. In the weeks that followed, the warehouse transformed. It became a heartbeat. Meetings grew larger, then smaller again, then scattered to avoid patterns. Information moved in whispers. Guard schedules, supply routes which officials could be bribed, which merchants could hide food, which streets were safest at night. The group learned to speak in code, to pass notes inside loaves of bread, to tuck messages into bundles of flowers, to signal with harmless gestures a folded sleeve, a ribbon tied a certain way, a lantern placed at a window. Evelyn found herself laughing more than she ever had in the estate. But the laughter didn't mean things were safe. It meant they were alive. Yet the more they built, the more danger thickened. Rumors of disturbances in the market reached the estate. Patrols increased. Guards watched longer. The master's men, her father's men, moved like hunting dogs, scenting blood. One evening, Evelyn returned home and felt the air shift before she even saw anyone. The estate's quiet was different, sharper, like the silence of people listening. She heard her father's voice echoing through the hall, cold and controlled. "Something is amiss," he said to his advisors. "There are reports of dissent. If there's a spark, we extinguish it before it becomes a fire." Evelyn's stomach dropped. She reached her room, shut the door, and pressed her back against it, breathing like she'd been running. If he's aware, he'll tighten everything. The next day, she met Alden in their usual place at the market, urgency vibrating through her. "We need to talk," she whispered. She told him what she'd overheard. Alden's expression hardened. "If the master is watching, we don't have time," he said. "But we can't get reckless. We shift tactics, smaller moves, quiet pressure." So they adjusted. They staged minor disruptions, supplies arriving late, a bribed official exposed in a whisper campaign, guards finding doors unexpectedly locked. Nothing big enough to justify a massacre, but enough to plant doubt. Enough to remind the town that control was not invincible. And then Clara said the thing no one wanted to say. "We have to step into the light," she insisted during one candlelit meeting, voice trembling but fierce. "If we stay in shadows forever, fear wins. People need to see us, to know they aren't alone." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. A public protest. Alden's jaw clenched. A protest could get people killed. It could also wake them up, Clara shot back. Tomas finally spoke, his voice quiet but heavy. "If we do it smart. We pick the busiest market day. We plan exits. We set watchers. We prepare diversions." The warehouse filled with the crackle of a decision forming. Evelyn's hands shook under the table, but she nodded, because a life lived in a cage wasn't living. They prepared in secret. Tomas painted banners on rough cloth: freedom, justice. We are human. Clara hid leaflets in flower bundles, delivering them like blessings. Sympathetic guards whispered which patrols could be delayed for a few minutes. Evelyn wrote words she'd never dared to speak, stripping them down until they were sharp and simple enough to pierce a crowd. The morning of the protest dawned bright and clear, as if the world had no idea what was coming. Evelyn woke early, heart in her throat. She dressed in dark clothing meant to blend into the market's crowd. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw not a lord's daughter, not a future bride, but someone on the edge of becoming dangerous. At the warehouse, the group gathered in tense silence. Alden stood before them. "Remember," he said, "we're not only fighting for ourselves. We fight for every person who has swallowed their voice because they were told it was worthless." Evelyn looked at the faces around her, ragtag, frightened, brave. A movement. They walked to the market in small groups, slipping between stalls as if they were ordinary shoppers. The town bustled, unaware that the ground beneath it was about to crack. At noon, when the market was thick with bodies, Evelyn stepped up onto a low stone ledge. Her mouth went dry. Then she thought of her father's banquet hall, of the suitors' hollow laughter, of Alden's chains. And she shouted. Now banners unfurled like wings. Chants rose. Freedom, justice, equality. The sound hit the market like thunder. People turned. Confusion rippled. Then curiosity. Then something like recognition, because the words weren't new. They were the words everyone carried privately, the words they didn't dare to share. A man lowered his basket and listened. A woman squeezed her child's hand and stepped closer. An old merchant wiped his eyes like he was ashamed to be seen feeling hope. More voices joined. The crowd swelled. Evelyn's chest burned with adrenaline. She chanted until her throat hurt, until her fear turned into fuel. Then the atmosphere changed. A wall of guards pushed through the market uniforms, harsh against the bright chaos of stalls and fruit and fabric. At the front was the captain, broad, brutal, loyal to the master, with the kind of loyalty that enjoyed hurting people. Enough, he bellowed. You are traitors! Disperse! For a heartbeat, the market froze. Fear surged like cold water. Evelyn felt it try to climb her spine. Then she saw Alden standing firm, his gaze locked on the captain as if the captain were the one who should be afraid. Evelyn lifted her chin. We will not be silenced, she shouted. We stand together for dignity. The crowd answered her. It was messy, imperfect human, but it was loud. The guards hesitated. Evelyn saw uncertainty flash in the eyes of a few of them, men who had listened at the warehouse, men who had started to question what they were protecting. Hope flickered. Then the captain barked an order. The guards surged forward. Chaos exploded. People screamed and scattered. Baskets overturned. Cloth banners snagged on cartwheels. The chant fractured into panic. Evelyn's heart slammed against her ribs as she realized the protest had become a hunt. Stay together, she cried, trying to hold the line. But fear is a wildfire, and it spreads fast. A guard shoved into the crowd. Someone fell. Another guard raised a baton. Evelyn grabbed Alden's arm. Their eyes met, no words needed. Run. She pulled him into a narrow alley, their bodies slipping between walls slick with grime. Behind them, the market roared with confusion and violence. They stopped in the shadows, breathing hard. Evelyn's hands shook. Her hair had come loose beneath her hood. Her lungs felt raw. We can't let this be the end, she rasped. Alden's face was tight, but his eyes burned. It isn't, he said. If they're willing to crush us, it means they're scared. We hit something that matters. Evelyn swallowed, forcing herself to stand straighter. Then we regroup, she said. We get smarter, stronger. Alden nodded. We keep going. For everyone who joined, for everyone who watched, for everyone who wants to join but hasn't found their courage yet. They slipped away through back streets, hearts pounding, minds racing. The protest ended in chaos. But it also did something the master could never undo. It proved they existed. In the days that followed, the town felt different. Whispers ran through streets like wind through dry grass. People talked in low voices at taverns and bakeries, in doorways and behind stalls. Did you hear them? Did you see the banners? They weren't wrong. Fear still lived in the town, but now it had company. Hope. At the warehouse, their numbers grew. New faces arrived, eyes bright with the thrill of having seen someone stand up. Some came trembling, apologizing for not joining sooner. Others came angry fists, clenched, ready to fight. Alden addressed them with careful intensity. The master is on alert, he warned. We cannot be reckless, but we cannot pause either. Momentum is a weapon. Evelyn added, we need to reach those still hesitating. We need to show them they're safer together than alone. Tomas proposed smaller gatherings in different neighborhoods. We tell stories, he said. We make it personal. People don't risk their lives for slogans. They risk their lives for each other. Clara suggested leaflets, simple, bold messages slipped into hands like secrets. United we stand. Silence is a chain. Dignity is not a gift. They began distributing them in clever ways under bread inside cloth folds tied to flower stems. Each leaflet was a seed. But the master's men were not blind. Patrols increased again. Homes were searched. People were questioned. A few merchants who had been too vocal were visited at night. One evening, the group gathered in the warehouse candlelight, revealing the strain on their faces. Alden spoke first. "I heard whispers in the guards," he said. "They're preparing a crackdown. The master wants to make an example." The room tightened. Evelyn's fingers curled around the edge of the table. "What do we do?" someone asked. "How do we survive this?" Alden looked to Evelyn, and she understood leadership wasn't just speeches. It was holding everyone's fear without letting it break you. "We adapt," Evelyn said. "We create safe houses, we establish routes, we protect families first, and we make sure our message doesn't die even if some of us are forced into hiding." A murmur rose, agreement, worry, determination tangled together. Then a guard, one who had joined them quietly, spoke up with a trembling voice. "I have a wife," he said, "a child. If I'm caught—" Evelyn's heart ached. She saw her own fear in his eyes. "I won't lie to you," she said softly. "This is dangerous. But the alternative is a life where your child grows up watching you bow your head every day. What kind of inheritance is that?" The guard swallowed, eyes wet. He nodded. In that moment, Evelyn realized something terrifying. She wasn't only risking her own life anymore. She was carrying theirs. After the meeting, Evelyn and Alden stepped outside the warehouse into the cold night air. The river nearby moved like a dark ribbon under the moon. "Do you ever doubt it?" Evelyn asked, voice small. Alden turned to her, his gaze steady. "Every day," he admitted. "But doubt doesn't mean stop. It means remember what's at stake." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm afraid of failing them." Alden's expression softened. "You're already doing something most people never do," he said. "You're choosing. That's power." They stood close, the space between them charged with everything they couldn't say out loud. In another world, in another life, maybe they would have been allowed something simple. Hands intertwined, a kiss without consequences. In this world, even their closeness was a kind of war. And still, Evelyn had never felt more alive. The master struck next, not in public, not with obvious violence. He struck with suspicion. He began calling servants in for questioning. He ordered tighter controls at the gates. He watched the market more closely. He sent his most loyal men to listen for whispers in taverns, to follow people who lingered too long near alleys. Back at the estate, Evelyn's father changed. His smile sharpened. His kindness became interrogations disguised as concern. "My dear," he said one afternoon, pouring tea for her like a father who adored his daughter. "You seem distracted lately. Is there something troubling you?" Evelyn's pulse spiked. She kept her face calm. "Nothing beyond the usual boredom of the estate," she replied lightly. Her father studied her as if she were a puzzle. "You've always been an obedient child," he said softly. "I trust that remains true." It wasn't a question. It was a warning. Evelyn forced a smile. "Of course, father." Inside, she felt something break and something harden at the same time. That night, she met Alden at the market's edge. "He's watching," she whispered. "He's tightening everything." Alden's jaw clenched. "Then we move faster," he said, "but smarter. We don't give him a single thread to pull." They set a new plan, decentralize. Multiple meeting spots, multiple messengers. No one person holding every detail. A structure that could survive even if one part was cut off. And to keep the people's courage alive, they planned another gathering, bigger, more coordinated, timed at dusk. Not a chaotic burst. A demonstration of unity. They chose the central square of town where buildings formed a bowl of stone that would echo voices. They would bring torches, banners, and a message simple enough for anyone to repeat. "We are human. We deserve dignity. We will not be silent." As the day approached, Evelyn felt her nerves fray. This time, the master would be ready. This time, the cost could be blood. But the thought of retreat, of returning to her father's hall, of wearing that glittering gown while her people suffered, made her stomach turn. On the evening of the gathering, the town's sky burned orange and purple, as if the heavens were holding their breath. Evelyn moved through streets with her hood up, her heart hammering. Around her, people flowed toward the square alone in pairs, in small clusters, faces tense but determined. Some carried torches. Some carried nothing but their bodies and their courage. Alden stood at the front, his posture tall, his eyes scanning the crowd. When Evelyn arrived, he met her gaze and gave a small nod, the kind of nod that said, "I'm here. We're doing this. Together." Alden raised his voice. "Tonight we stand as one," he declared. "Not because we are fearless, but because we are tired. Tired of being treated like property. Tired of being told our suffering is normal." The crowd answered with a low rumble of agreement. Evelyn stepped forward and her voice joined his. "Look around you," she said. "This is what they fear. Not weapons, not violence. This people refusing to be alone." Torches lifted higher. The chant began slow at first, then louder, then unstoppable. Freedom, justice, equality. The square shook with it. For a moment, Evelyn felt something she'd never felt at the estate belonging. Then the guards arrived. More than last time. Armor glinting, faces hard. The captain at their front like a blade. "Traitors," he shouted. "Disperse or be punished." A hush threatened the crowd. Evelyn felt fear rise again, cold, vicious. Then Clara shouted, "We will not be silent!" Thomas yelled, "United, we stand!" Voices surged. The captain's eyes narrowed. He barked an order. The guards pushed forward. But this time the crowd didn't fracture immediately. People locked arms. They held their ground, shaking but holding. Evelyn saw something that made her chest tighten. Guards hesitating again, several of them. Their eyes flickered between the captain and the crowd, between orders and conscience. Alden raised his voice, cutting through the chaos. "You don't have to do this," he shouted at them. "You're not protecting justice. You're protecting a man's fear." For one breath, it seemed like the line might break, not the crowd's line, but the guards. Then the captain struck a protester with the butt of his weapon. The spell shattered. Panic erupted. Evelyn grabbed Alden's hand. "Now," she yelled. A whistle sounded Tomas's signal. A cart rolled into the street at the far end of the square, blocking the guard's path. A small group on another street began chanting loudly, pulling patrols away. People peeled off in planned directions, slipping into alleys, into doorways, into safe houses. Evelyn and Alden ran. They sprinted through narrow passages, the town blurring around them. Footsteps echoed behind, shouts, orders. They ducked into a courtyard, then through a gate, then into a storage room that smelled of grain and dust. They collapsed behind stacked crates, breathing like drowning people. Evelyn pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to quiet her gasps. Alden leaned close. "You did well," he whispered. Evelyn's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "People got hurt," she whispered back. "I wanted them to hear us, not to bleed for us." Alden's gaze softened, but it didn't waver. "They already bleed," he said. "Every day. Tonight, they bled in the open, and that means the lie is cracking." Outside, footsteps faded. Silence returned in broken fragments. They waited, then slipped away toward the river where the sound of water could swallow their breaths. At the riverbank under a thin moon, Evelyn stared at the dark current. "If we win," she said quietly, "what happens to us?" Alden looked at her, and for the first time his voice carried something almost tender. "If we win," he said, "I want to wake up and make choices. Simple ones. What work I do, where I live, who I love." Evelyn's throat tightened. "And you?" he asked. Evelyn laughed softly, bitterly. "I don't even know what my own choices look like yet," she admitted, "but I want to find out." They stood close enough that Evelyn could feel the warmth of him even in the cold. close enough that the world's rules felt distant, almost breakable. They didn't kiss, not because they didn't want to, because in their world, love was not a private thing. It was a weapon, a weakness, a target, and they couldn't afford to give the master another way to hurt them. Evelyn returned to the estate before dawn, slipping through shadows like a ghost. As she walked past the portraits of her ancestors, she felt their painted eyes follow her. Men and women who had benefited from this system, who had called it tradition, who had built fortunes on obedience. Evelyn stopped in front of one portrait, a stern woman in pearls, a lady who looked powerful, untouchable. Evelyn wondered what she'd sacrificed to look that way. In her room, Evelyn opened the window and let cold air fill her lungs. She thought of the square, the torches, the chants. She thought of the captain's brutality. She thought of the guards who hesitated just for a second, but enough to matter. The master could tighten gates. He could whip servants. He could jail merchants. He could flood the town with fear. But he couldn't erase what people had seen. He couldn't unteach them the taste of unity. And that was the true danger. In the warehouse the next night, the mood was heavier. A sympathetic older guard, one who had been feeding them schedules, had been arrested. No one knew how much he'd said. No one knew whether he'd been tortured. No one knew if the master was already coming for them. Fear crept into the room like smoke. Some people wanted to flee. Some wanted to fight immediately. Voices rose. Hands shook. Evelyn stood up, the candlelight carving shadows on her face. She felt the weight of their eyes. She spoke calmly, even though her heart was racing. "I won't blame anyone who wants to leave," she said. "If you need to protect your family, you should. But I need you to understand something. The master doesn't punish rebellion only. He punishes the idea of rebellion. Even if we disappear, he will tighten his hold because he tasted fear. And he will want more." Silence. Evelyn continued, voice steady. "If we retreat completely, we teach him he was right to crush us. If we stand carefully, intelligently, we teach him that we are not sparks. We are a fire that learned how to survive rain." Alden stepped beside her and reached for her hand. He didn't hide the gesture. He didn't make it romantic. He made it a promise that said, "You're not alone in this." That one gesture steadied the room. Plans resumed, more cautious, more complex. Safe houses, hidden routes, signals, fallback leaders, caches of food and medicine, a code book disguised as a prayer journal. They were no longer improvising. They were building a structure meant to outlive fear. And yet a new problem formed in the shadows. Because movements grow the same way storms do, by pulling in everything nearby, including people who don't come for freedom. Some come for power. Some come to settle grudges. Some come to sell secrets. Evelyn noticed things. A man who asked too many questions about names. A merchant who always arrived late and left early. A guard whose loyalty seemed to shift with the wind. Whispers that didn't match the facts they'd shared. Alden noticed too. Their eyes met across the room more than once, silent conversations passing between them. Someone is listening. Someone is waiting for the right moment to betray. But the rebellion was already too big to simply stop. Too many hearts had been awakened. Too many people had seen the square and decided they were done being quiet. That night, after the meeting, Alden and Evelyn walked along the river again, staying in darkness. "We're changing the town," Evelyn said, half amazed, half terrified. Alden's gaze was distant. "Yes," he replied, "which means the master will change too." Evelyn wrapped her cloak tighter. "Do you think he knows it's me?" Alden looked at her sharply. "Not yet," he said. "But he's smart, and he's cruel. He will look for leverage." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "Leverage like?" Alden didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. "Like the people you love." Evelyn's breath caught. The truth was brutal. Her father had always owned her. Now he might use that ownership as a weapon not only against her, but against the movement. And the truth that scared her even more, Evelyn loved Alden. Not in the soft way of poems her governess used to read, not in the distant way nobles spoke of love while discussing dowries. She loved him in the way a drowning person loves air. In the days that followed, Evelyn moved through the estate like a performer on a tightrope. She smiled when her father watched. She laughed at conversations that felt like knives. She accepted invitations to small gatherings, pretending she belonged among people who would have her killed if they knew where she went at night. Her father began pushing harder. He presented her with suitors again, each one more appropriate, each one more clearly a political move. A polished nobleman spoke of security. A refined aristocrat promised stability. A wealthy older man spoke of protecting her from the chaos in town. Evelyn heard what they didn't say, protecting her from her own choice. At night, she returned to the warehouse where her true life waited in candlelight and whispered plans. The rebellion needed a decisive step, Tomas argued. We can't keep running, he said. We need to hit something that matters, something that disrupts the master's power without hurting the people. Clara suggested targeting the estate's supply chain. If we control what enters and leaves, we control leverage, she said. Alden proposed a different plan, bolder, riskier. The master uses fear, he said. So we expose him. We reveal his corruption, his illegal trade, his brutality, the things he hides behind noble language. Evelyn felt a chill. Exposing him meant documents, witnesses, proof, and it meant someone would have to get close enough to steal, close enough to be caught. Evelyn realized the truth before anyone said it out loud. The person with access was her blood, her name, her father's trust, thin as it was. Evelyn's pulse hammered as the room turned toward her. No one asked, not directly. They didn't have to. Evelyn held her breath and then she spoke. I'll do it, she said. Alden's head snapped toward her. Evelyn, I'll do it, she repeated louder. I can get into his study. I can find what he hides. If we have proof, we can turn the town, turn the guards who are hesitating. We can make it impossible for him to pretend. Alden's eyes were fierce, and beneath the fury was fear. If you're caught, he'll destroy you. Evelyn's voice went quiet. He's already destroying me, she said. Just slowly. I'd rather risk one clean break than live a lifetime of quiet death. The room held its breath. Then Tomas nodded. Clara exhaled. Someone whispered, she's serious. Alden looked at Evelyn like she was both the most dangerous and the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. And maybe she was, because Evelyn had crossed the point of no return. In the coming nights, they planned the infiltration like a heist, timing when her father drank late with advisors, entry through the servants' corridor, cover a false errand medicine for the household, exit routes too in case one was watched, a drop point, a hollow stone near the river where Evelyn could hide documents before returning home, signals if danger, a lantern placed at the third window. Evelyn practiced moving silently. She practiced breathing through panic. She practiced lying with her eyes while keeping truth in her spine. The night she went, her hands were cold. She waited until the estate's noises softened. A distant laugh, a door closing, the final footfalls of a guard making rounds. She slipped into the corridor like a shadow and approached her father's study. The door was locked. Evelyn's heartbeat roared in her ears. Then she remembered her father's key ring was always placed on the small table in the hall during late-night discussions because he believed the estate was an extension of his body. He believed nothing inside it could threaten him. Arrogance is a gift to rebels. Evelyn found the keys. Her fingers barely shook as she turned the lock. The door opened. Inside, the study smelled like leather, ink, and control. Evelyn moved quickly, scanning shelves, drawers, the heavy desk where her father signed contracts that shaped people's lives. She found ledgers, sealed letters, a locked compartment beneath the desk. Her breath hitched. She forced it open with a thin tool Tomas had given her. Inside documents detailing bribes, illegal trade routes, names of guards paid to look away, purchases that were not purchases, but people. Evelyn's stomach twisted. Proof. Enough to burn him. She stuffed the papers into a cloth pouch inside her cloak. Then she froze. A sound in the hall. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not the careless steps of a servant. The door handle turned. Evelyn's blood went ice. Someone pushed the door, found it unlocked. Paused. A voice spoke softly, amused. "My daughter," her father said. "You do love to surprise me." Evelyn's heart stopped. And that is where I'll pause, because what happens next will decide everything. Will Evelyn talk her way out of her father's trap? Will she sacrifice the documents to save herself? Will Alden and the network be exposed because one door was opened at the wrong moment? Or will Evelyn do something unthinkable, something that breaks the last thread binding her to the estate? If you want part 2, the confrontation in the study, the first true betrayal inside the rebellion, and the choice Evelyn makes that could either save Alden or save the entire movement, comment next right now. And if you made it this far, subscribe, because the next chapter doesn't just get intense, it gets irreversible. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook. If you are adapting this for YouTube, add a 2 to 3 second beat here, then return with a tighter recap and the part 2 hook.